2 containers here of zebra plant, and both of them really need to be repotted. I've actually been meaning to repot these for over a year. They have really outgrown these pots and definitely need to be separated and put into larger containers of their own. And I discovered something kind of interesting about these varieties. So first up, how do you decide if your succulent needs to be repotted? One, if it's exploding, and if you can like hold the top and the roots are in there so tight that the plants don't come out, that's a really good indicator that it probably needs to be repotted. Another part is just personal preference. A lot of people like to keep their succulents really compact in an arrangement, and that's totally fine. These would continue to keep growing and stay alive. The biggest risk that they have is actually getting water trapped in between the roots and causing the roots to rot. Sometimes it's also hard to get water all the way into the center, especially if you're not bottom watering. Now, these don't have roots coming out the bottom, but that would be another indicator that your plants are definitely in need of a new home. At the beginning, I mentioned that these are zebra plant. Zebra plant is a really common name for Horithiopsis, and typically it refers to Horithiopsis fasciata or attenuata. Interestingly, if we look really close here, you can see the inside of these leaves are pretty smooth. That's an indication that these are Horithiopsis fasciata. However, this one right here, supposedly the same variety, I'm pretty sure I got them at the same time from the same place. These have bumps on the inside. Those bumps are called tubercles, and that is indicating that this is Horithiopsis attenuata. So attenuata has the tubercles on the inside of the leaves or top side of the leaves, and fasciata does not. So fasciata only has the tubercles on the back side or lower portion of the leaves. Looking at the other arrangement that I'm going to pull apart, this one has a tiny bit of these tubercles on the leaves, but these others are smooth, and this one doesn't look that much different than the others in the pot, so I'm pretty sure it is the same variety. But it is interesting to me that it also has one that looks slightly different than the others, just like that other arrangement did. I decided to pull the picture up in the Succulent Tracker app from when I first got the plant. I don't remember where I got it, and I really didn't put any tags or anything in here to indicate that. I am noticing here, though, that the striping on these are a lot closer and a little bit thicker, and these, the striping is further apart. But I don't have a really great picture of the inside. However, going back and looking at this original photo, I would say I probably could have told them apart when I got them, but I wasn't paying that close attention. That's a pretty subtle difference between these two plants. They really do look very, very similar. The good news, though, is that they both require the same care. So whether or not you have fasciata or attenuata, you can care for them the same way, give them the same amount of lighting, and water them with the soak and dry method whenever the soil is dry and if the leaves feel a little bit limp. Going back to the Succulent Tracker app really quick, you can see this was last watered 22 days ago. I do like my succulents to be well watered when I repot them, but I want the soil to be completely dry. And because these are so root bound and everything is so close together, I wanted to make sure they were dry all the way to the center before I repotted. All right, let's get these pulled out. Unlike other succulents that I've unpotted before, these were actually individual plants. So as you can see, they are separating pretty easily. The roots are still a little bit tangled together, but they're very easy to pull apart. And look at that. This one's got a little baby attached to it. It's actually big enough, and I can see that it has some roots of its own. So I'm going to go ahead and break off those roots. Normally I try and keep the roots attached, but clearly in my haste, I did not do a very good job there. This one will put off roots of its own though once I put it in soil and water it every few days. Once I can tell that it does have roots, I'll go ahead and cut back and just water using the soak and dry method. Whenever you unpot something, I highly recommend looking at the roots to see if they are healthy. And in this case, I feel like we kind of have a mix. There are definitely some dead roots in here. There are some that are healthier. And I think once it's repotted, it will actually be just fine. There are some dead lower leaves here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull those off just to keep the plant a little healthier and lower my risk of getting rot. Considering how tightly packed together these were, these plants are really healthy. I'm excited to plant them up on their own, give them some more space, and see if they'll start to produce more pups. So here's an up close look at the attenuata with the tubercles in the middle. I was going to pull this leaf off, and as I was about to do so, I noticed there's a little baby that's hiding under there. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that leaf attached so it can kind of protect the baby and let it keep growing. This one has some really weird dead leaf patterns. So some of these lower leaves look healthy, but then the inner leaves are really dried up. And the roots on this one don't look especially healthy. Most of them are kind of flattened and dark and dull. So I'm guessing that this one actually has some watering issues. This could be rot. It could also just be dehydrated from not getting enough water because the other plants were kind of choking it out. So that is something to keep in mind if you're growing a bunch of succulents in an arrangement together. As they get larger, the longer you leave them in there, the more likely you are to have problems with one or two of the plants. This one also has a little baby growing out. And let's go with planter number 2. Oh, interesting. This one is still wet. It's not super wet, but the soil has a little bit more organic components to it. Both of them looked like they were in the gritty mix, but I wonder if I recycled whatever soil I was using for this one and put in some that had some other soil also. Not a lot of roots, but they do look healthy. And this plant overall seems to be doing really well. So this one also has a little baby, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull that off. It didn't have any roots that I could see that were attached to the baby plant. This one's definitely big enough it can root on its own, so I'll just go ahead and plant it up. Now you might notice these have some little crispy tips on the end. It's pretty common for Haworthiopsis to get that. There's not necessarily a problem with it. Sometimes it can be from not getting enough water. Sometimes it can be a little bit of sunburn, but it's not a massive problem that's going to eventually kill your succulent. You can break them off if you'd like, just to kind of clean it up if you don't like the look of the dead tips. All right, our final one here also has a bunch of those dried up tips, so I'm just pinching them off with my fingernail. Again, you don't need to do this. It's just an aesthetics thing. The plant will be just fine either way. If you chop them all off, it'll be fine, and if you leave them on, it will be just fine. I do think it just looks a little bit nicer to have the ends kind of cleaned up. Now this one also has a baby growing on it, and similar to the one I just pulled off, this is super attached to the mother there. It doesn't really have roots of its own. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it off, and we'll plant it up elsewhere. It also has another baby growing inside here. But this one I'm going to leave attached because it's not really big enough that I feel like it will remove nicely from the mother plant. Now that I have everything removed, I'm going to go ahead and get these potted up in some fresh Bonsai Jack gritty mix, and then they'll be good to go for another year or two. When I'm repotting, I really don't use a lot of tools. I always make sure I have a good drainage screen. I used to use drywall tape, and that works really well. I've since switched to these screens as I just find they're really easy to drop in. Use a big scoop to go in the soil, sometimes a little scoop to get around in, and maybe some tweezers here and there. And then I also have this Bonsai Jack gritty mix, and I love having it in containers and keeping my pot in the container as I'm repotting, so that way the soil doesn't spill and make a big mess. I'll usually put a little bit of soil in the bottom of the pot and then make sure that the plant will be above the rim of the pot. So I want the roots to be below and I want the leaves to be above the rim. And then we'll just fill around. These pots that I'm putting the succulents into are actually the same size as the pots I just pulled them out of. So I took 6 succulents that were in 2 pots, and now they're all potted individually. These are going to be very happy to be all by themselves in their own pot and not have to fight over space with other plants. Now I just have these 3 little babies left to plant. So I just have some little 2-inch pots, and I am going to actually fill them with Magic Succulent soil. I'll have links for that in the description. It's also a gritty mix, but it has more organic material in it, and so it holds water a little bit longer. And I think it will help these to root a bit faster, but then it's still a good long-term growing medium for them. Here's just a quick side-by-side look at the 2 different soils. I do like having both. This Bonsai Jack's Gritty Mix is what I tend to use for pretty much everything, but Andrea from Just Suck It created this Magic Succulent soil because she felt like her plants were drying out too quickly and she didn't want to water that often. So this still drains really well for succulents, but it also just holds water longer, and so I like using it for cuttings or plants that like to have water a bit more often than others. I'm going to go ahead and just fill this most of the way, and then we'll plop the little succulent right down inside it. And there we have the 6 main plants plus the 3 little babies, and I am super excited to have these finally separated. And I'm also happy to have discovered that I had that attenuata as well as some fasciata. As with all of my succulents after repotting, I am going to let these dry for a day and then I'll go ahead and water them, and these will head back under the grow lights. Now, Haworthias don't typically need to be under grow lights, but that's where I keep all of my succulents. And as you can see, these do have a very dark color. They're actually pretty stressed. If they get less light, they'll be a little bit brighter green. And you might notice a little bit of stretching if you just have them in a windowsill, but they are a low light succulent, or at least they tolerate low light as well as brighter light.